This video will show you how to carve a low relief design or bas relief design into a slab of clay. So in the last video, I showed you how to transfer your design from your paper to your pre-cut slab of clay that was already made prior. And we took a section of our design to transfer for practice purposes. So now my clay is ready to be carved. So I have my drawing close by so that I can refer back to it so I remember my plan, where I'm going to be carving, where I'm going to be beveling, what I'm going to leave untouched, and where I'm going to add on. Now, when carving, it's best to start with your lowest area and then your highest area last. So I'm going to start by finding all of my carved areas, and I'm going to show you how to do that first. So during class, you're going to be given another tool that you didn't already receive. This is called a loop tool. And this loop tool is going to help us to remove ribbons of clay from our slab. So in looking at my design, I can see that I have this large shape right here, which is this shape here. So I'm going to start with this shape. Now the nice thing about these loop tools is one side has like a flat edged loop and the other side has a rounded edge loop, and we'll use both of them depending on what type of shape we're trying to remove. Okay, so as we're carving, we want to go down a little bit at a time. So we're not trying to carve all the way through this at once. We're slowly building down, removing the clay. One other thing, as I start carving this, the thickness of our slabs need to come into account. So we want to make sure that we're not carving more than halfway through our slab, or we might carve through the bottom, okay? So I'm going to start by following my edges of my lines that I outlined in my last video. And I'm just going to do a little bit at a time. So I'm taking my time and I'm following the edge of the line that I'm trying to remove. And then I'm going to pull the clay off. Now I have a curved line here, so I'm going to go in with my curved part of my loop tool to continue here. And following this line. One other thing, as we're carving, I always like to start like at an edge and not end at one. So right here I have an edge, and I want to be careful because I don't want to make that, I don't want to accidentally go into a shape that I'm planning on not carving. So I'm going to come back from this the other direction. And you have other loop tools available for you to use if this one's too big. So I think I'm going to go in with this loop tool, my mini loop tool, to remove some of this area, because the loop tool I was trying to use is a little bit too big. Okay, I also at school have some specialty loop tools that we can use in class that are in between the size of this loop tool and this one, okay? That kind of made a rough line, so I'm just going to smooth this out with this loop tool, just going over it to smooth this down, okay? So right now I've outlined my shape, and I want to go in and I want to remove the rest of this. As you're carving, you want to try to carve evenly. Okay, so we don't want to see the lines of your carving. Right now my clay, the temperature of my clay is at about, it's a little bit past soft leather hard, which is where we want our clay to be. The clay is going to continue to dry out as we're working with it, but we still want to be able to add clay on, so we want to be careful that our clay is not drying out too much. All right, so I'm going to continue going over this shape until I've carved halfway down through my slab. Okay, so at this point, I've carved about halfway, not quite at the edge here. I can go a little bit deeper. Let me take that down a little bit deeper. But I've carved about halfway through my slab. It's not cleaned yet. So as we're doing, as we're creating our designs on our slab, we're gonna come back and rework some areas. But for right now, I'm just trying to get it down to an even thickness. And then also notice how this is creating a shadow here. So this is what we're looking for in our bas relief designs. We want there to be enough contrast between the raised areas to create some light and shadow. So I'm going to continue looking at my design here, and I'm going to continue to carve down all of my little areas here that need to be carved away. Okay, so at this point, I've just done a quick carve of my lowest areas. The next thing that I want to show you, and we'll come back to these shapes that we carved away at the end of the video to show you how to clean them up and to make them look nice. One other thing, I don't know if you noticed when I was doing this area here, I kind of messed up a little bit and I took a chunk out that I didn't mean to, but I just went in and I just kind of tried to like reshape my line. So that might happen if you mess up. Just try to make it look like it was a happy accident so no one will know that you accidentally messed up. Okay, so the next thing that I want to show you is how to bevel. So beveling is really cool because beveling is going to create the illusion of depth without having to carve like a whole big area away. So in my design, I have a few areas where I'm beveling. I'm beveling here, I'm beveling here, I'm beveling on the outside here. So I'm going to show you in this big shape here. So my beveled edge is going to be along this line right here. I'm going to use this loop tool, and I like the squared side for this because I'm going to be able to follow this line. Now, I'm going to see if I can get my tool in a way you can see. If this were my slab, and if we were carving it, like if you could see it from the side, and we're carving, this is going to give us a nice flat carve, okay? For a bevel, we want like an angled carve. How can I show you? Okay, let me just do it on the clay. I'm sorry. So we want to hold the tool almost at a 45-degree angle. So instead of flat, it's going to be angled up. Okay, so I'm going to start by just carving this tool along this line at an angle instead of flat. So it's angled down. If I put my finger under here, you can see that the top part of my modeling tool or my loop tool is not hitting the clay. Okay, and I'm going to just carefully press down and follow that line. I'm going to follow it all the way to the end. And then I'm going to carefully remove the tool, okay? So right now you should be able to see that we're creating a shadow in here, all right? But I can still see, like, I don't know if where you can see like the light is hitting right in here. I want more of a transition between my deepest area. It's going to slowly taper from halfway deep, like we carved in these areas, to left untouched. So where you can see this almost line that's created from my bevel, I'm now going to flatten out my loop tool, and I'm just going to kind of go back and forth over that line to smooth it out so that it goes seamlessly into the rest of my shape. Okay, I may need to go back a few times and re-bevel just to create a stronger line. So I may go back in and hold my tool again at an angle just to get a little bit more. This is a pretty big shape, so I wanted mine to bevel just a little bit more. And then go back in with the flat side and just kind of, I'm just really lightly, I'm barely pressing, I'm not pressing very hard at all. I'm just kind of like lightly trying to smooth out and taper so that I almost have like a curved area here. Okay, so that's what we call a bevel. I'm going to come at this from a different direction. This line, this side over here, because I carved, I want to be careful there so that I don't lose my shape. So I'm going to kind of stop my bevel about right here. So there's a little bit of space in between my shapes. I'm just going to pull this direction and kind of clean that up. Okay. All right. So there is my beveled surface. I'm going to do the same thing over here and over here. So you can just watch as I bevel the rest of my shapes. One other quick thing. When I bevel on this side, you always want to be beveling up against one of your outlines. Like I'm not going to bevel on the corner over here because it doesn't really make sense. So I'm going to have to bevel going this way. I want this shape right here that's going to be left untouched to almost look like it's sitting on top of the shape behind it. So by beveling it, it's going to make it look like this is on top. Okay, so I think at this point I have beveled all of my lines that need to be beveled. And I'm ready to start adding some clay to my, my relief sculpture. Now, when we add clay, we want to make sure that the clay temperature will accept it. So I'm noticing that mine's starting to get a little bit closer to dry leather hard, which is okay, but I want it to be a little bit softer for adding on so I can make sure that my pieces will stick together. So I'm gonna pause right now. I'll come back in just a minute. I'm gonna wrap mine in some damp paper towel and put it in a bag for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'm going to check on it, and then once I see that the temperature is ready to be added onto, I will show you how to do all the add-ons. Okay, so my slab has been sitting in my bag wrapped with just a little bit of damp paper towel for about 10 minutes. It should be ready to go. While I was waiting for my slab to revive a little bit, I took the time to clear off my workspace to get rid of any of those crumbs that were created from carving. And I just threw those into the garbage. Those are going to dry out really fast, and we don't want to get them like embedded into the soft clay that we're going to be working with next. So I also have a little chunk of some plastic clay. I have my slip container, and I have a few new tools that we're going to be using. And I still have my drawing close by so I can use it for reference. So I'm going to go ahead and take my project out of my little bag that I have it stored in, unwrap the damp paper towel, and we're going to get rid of this damp paper towel. So I'm just going to throw mine away. And at this point, I can feel that my clay has softened up a little bit, which is good. I'm also noticing I have a little chunk on the back, so I'm going to try to peel that off. Okay. All right, so this is more what I'm looking for to add onto about a soft leather hard. So the next thing I'm going to show you then is how to add onto your slab. Now, when we're adding onto these, we're not like cutting out shapes and slipping and scoring them on top. Instead, what we want to do, we want to either do like coils or like pieces of clay like a coil, and it can depend on the thickness, and we're just going to slowly and gradually build up our layers until we get it to the height that we want. So in my design, I have a lot of shapes like this that are going to be added on. So for mine, I'm going to roll out a coil. So I don't really need quite all of this clay. So I'm just going to take a little bit of it. And then I always like to keep my extra clay wrapped in a bag so that it's not drying out while I'm not working with it. So I'm just going to tuck this under so that it can stay plastic. All right, so I'm just going to squish this clay in my hand a little bit just to warm it up and wedge it. And then just a reminder that whenever we're attaching a piece of clay to another piece of clay, we're always going to score, slip, and blend. Okay, so even with this project, score, slip, and blend. All right, and then also we want to make sure that no part of our clay that we're adding on is thicker than a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to start by rolling a coil. As I'm rolling my coil, I just want to monitor it, make sure it's not drying out, make sure there's no cracks or creases. If there are, most likely it's going to be blended in. So I have some thicker areas that I'm going to add onto and some thinner areas. Most of mine are pretty thin, so I'm just going to cut this coil in half and try to make this a little bit thinner. And then I want to check it against some of my areas where I'm adding on. So I'm adding on in this section here. So it's still looking kind of big. I'm going to make it just a little bit thinner. Now, you can also, in place of rolling coils, you can, flatten out some clay, but for mine, I want mine to pop up almost like have a curved edge to it. So this isn't just the only way you can add on. You can add on, in bigger pieces as well, just so long as the thickness of it isn't more than a 1/2 inch. All right, so I'm going to start right here, adding on. So that looks about right. So I'm just going to pull off some of this extra. And then once I've figured out how it's going to fit, I'm going to score both pieces of clay. I'm going to add my slip. And then I'm going to even go back and just score just a little bit more, just to make sure that I don't have anything popping off on me as this dries. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place this down on top. And then my coil is kind of sticking off the edge here. I don't really want that, so I'm going to pull this part off. And then I'll show you the edges here in just a little bit. So right now, this is pretty preliminary. I'm going to start blending my coil in, but I also have to remember that I don't want to lose any of my other shapes that I've already maybe carved away. Okay, so I'm just gonna go back in here and just make sure where it lines up with my carved area that it's pretty flat inside there. And I can always go back in and carve away some of this coil after I've attached it on. All right, so this shape that I have right next to it is going to be left untouched. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend this coil down into my other shape behind it. So it's almost going to create this raised like edge to it. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a modeling tool. So I have this one that I'm going to be working with, and I like this one because it has a rounded edge and a flat edge. Some of the modeling tools might go at an angle. It does the same thing. Okay, so this side for right now I'm not going to touch. I want to blend this side. So I'm going to turn my slab so that I can pull the clay towards me instead of away from me. I'm going to use the curved end of my modeling tool to do this. Most of the coil is going to stay put. I'm just going to almost blend half of it. So I want to make sure it's not moving on me. So I'm just going to do this a little bit at a time. I'm going to slowly start to pull my clay down into its space. Now, this is when things can get a little bit confusing because you start to maybe lose some of your lines that you carved into. So it's really important that you have your drawing close by so that you can reference it as you're working. All right, so I have an area here where this is going to continue around and up. Okay, so I'm not going to mess with this part yet. I'm just going to go back in with my finger now, and I just want to gently smooth and round this out so that it looks like it's seamlessly flowing into the shape below it. And if I had to add a little bit more clay, I can add a little bit more clay in. I still want to look at my edges. Okay, so let me just turn this up so you can see. So you can see how it's starting to raise up like that. I want to take care of my edges also. So when we put these, when we actually turn these into a project, so right now we're working on a practice tile, but when we turn these into our project, you're going to see the edges. So we always want to make sure we take care of our edges. Now this side right here is still looking rough, but it's pretty wet. So I'm not gonna worry about this area right here because at the end, I'm gonna show you how we're gonna go back in and clean everything up. All right. So I still have some coil rolled here, but you're gonna notice that my coil gets pretty skinny there. So I am going to see if I can taper my coil down a little bit more on this end. And if I have to do this in sections, then I can do it in sections. So I'm just really gently right now rolling this coil. And there's a few surface cracks in it, but I think once I get this on here, those will blend in. Okay, so I'm just gonna wrap this on here. It looks like it's going to fit pretty well. So where my coil's overlapping my other coil, they're going to blend together eventually here. So I'm just going to kind of pinch off that coil and then I'll clean that edge up here in just a minute. So the next step is going to be to score and slip. So I'm going to go back in and score my clay. All right, so mine has kind of a lot of wet slip on it. So I'm going to let that dry for just a second. I'm going to try to get some of that slip off before I start blending. And then I'm going to go back in with my modeling tool. And I'm going to blend this edge down in now. Okay, and then I'm going to go back in and I'm just going to smooth out again those areas that need to be smoothed. Clean it up. And then again, at the end, we're going to clean some stuff up. So if we need to carve away, if we went too high maybe, and we want to carve some of this down later, we can do that. But right now my clay is at soft leather hard and carving works better at dry leather hard. So I'm just going to continue adding to my tile in my areas where I want to add on to. And I'll kind of speed it up so that you can just watch the process. One other thing I want to mention at this point, if something's not working the way you thought it would, it's okay to change your design a little bit. So like if I'm trying to add something and it's not working, maybe I reconsider and I carve that shape instead of adding it, or maybe I find a way to bevel the shape. So that's why we're doing the practice. So we want to try to get everything worked out on our practice tile before we begin our final. Okay, so I'm going to continue adding on to my slab, and then you can just watch. And then after I'm done adding, I will show you how to clean all this up. Okay, so at this point, I am done adding on my clay. It's still looking a little rough, so I still need to go back in and refine some of my carved areas, maybe go back over my beveled areas, clean up some of this added on clay. But the issue that I'm having is that the plastic clay that I just added on to is still too soft to really do too much blending with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this sit out for a little while, probably like 10 minutes, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how to clean these up and finish. All right, so I've let my clay sit out for a little while, and it's dried now to almost dry leather hard. Definitely not soft leather hard anymore. So at this point, I would not want to add anything else onto this because it would not stay. All right, so no adding on after this, but what we can do at this point is clean up our carving and make it look really good. So I have some tools over here that I'm going to kind of switch between as I'm cleaning up all of my edges. Some things that I want to make sure of for my craftsmanship of my work. I want to make sure that my carved areas are as flat and level as possible. Okay, so it's one of the first things. One of the other things that I want to make sure of, if I turn this to the side, I have a lot of messy areas in throughout here along the walls that were created almost from where I carved. So I want to take the time to also go in, smooth out those edges to create a nice surface. All right, so I don't want to see any cracks, any crumbly pieces. Everything should flow together seamlessly. So there should be no seams at all, okay? Also where I added on to, so like over here, turn it this way, this area got pretty messy. So I want to make sure I go in there and kind of fill that in, get rid of some of the crumbs that are in there. And then also, as I was doing my add-ons, I lost some of my shapes that I carved in or that I beveled. So like especially over here on this side. So I'm going to go back in and I remember I have my design here handy so I can go back and look to see where I'm missing maybe like an outline that was covered up when I was doing my blending. I want to try to get that outline back in and clean up some of these rough edges. I don't know if you can see, but when I was blending my clay, you can kind of see where the clay was attaching. So I'm going to smooth that out as well. So again, I'm going to use a variety of tools, and I'm basing my tools on that I choose. This is going to probably be my most used tool. I like the flat edge of it. It helps me to scrape away. So I'm not really carving right here. This was a part of my design that was to be left unchanged. So I'm just trying to smooth out the uneven areas. Now I will tell you this, if you're impatient and you try to do this while your clay is at soft leather hard, it's not going to work as well. Dry leather hard is the stage where we carve, okay, and it's also a good stage for cleaning up. All right, so I think I'll just continue cleaning up my edges and you can watch as I work. Something important to keep in mind as I'm working here, I'm thinking about, you want to make sure that you're cleaning your loop tool or your modeling tool off as you're working. The clay is going to dry pretty quick on here because there's not much of it. And it's going to affect your ability to scrape the clay if you have dried pieces of clay. Another option, you could just kind of pick at it, or if you could have a damp paper towel to kind of wipe it off on. That would be helpful too. Okay, so at this point, I can see this is going to take me a while. I think you've seen enough of me working. At this point, I'm just going to stop the video. I'm going to finish going over all of my little edges, taking care, looking at all of my sides, looking at the edges of my tile, making sure nothing's hanging over weird, make sure everything looks the way I want it to look. And then I'm going to come back for one more thing. I want to show you how at the very end we can use our stiff blending brush to just do a little extra touch up. Okay, so I'm back and I finished blending and carving away and cleaning up all of my edges on my slab. So the next thing that I want to do at this point is I am going to use my stiff blending brush to go in and clean up some of my edges. So when I use my stiff blending brush, I have a bucket of water here that I'm using. So I'm just going to dip my brush into the water and then blot it off on my mat so it's not soaking wet but just damp. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to smooth out all of my edges here. And I can almost paint with it a little bit on the surface to help me clean that up a little bit. I'll hold this in my hand so I can see it a bit better. So this is really going to do a nice job smoothing everything out. Occasionally I am going to clean my brush off because I'm going to get a layer of slip that's going to appear on my brush. Now, one other good thing about going over this with the water is as we were carving there towards the end on the stiff or the dry leather hard clay, what we did was we actually created a burnish on the clay. So because we were rubbing back and forth, the clay's starting to get shiny and it's losing some of its texture. Now we want to glaze these later, and if we burnish the clay too much, the glaze won't stick very well. So make sure that you go over all surfaces of your clay. So I don't know if you can see here how this is looking a little bit less shiny than over here. It's almost smoothing it out. One other thing at this stage, we also want to remember to carve our name and class code into the bottom of our practice tile. And this is a good stage in which to do that. So when you carve your name, just a reminder that it can be your first name, last initial. It can be your first initial, last name, or if you want to put your full name and then your particular class code for your class. Okay, so that would go on the back so that we can tell whose is whose. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to smooth out all of my shapes with my stiff blending brush. Okay, so at this point, my design is finished. I would probably wrap this in dry paper towel and put it in my plastic bag. However, if let's say I'm working on it during a class period and I'm not finished, I would recommend wrapping these with just a little bit of damp paper towel, maybe just so it wraps around it once, and then putting it into your bag so that way we can maintain the temperature of the clay and it won't dry out too much. So I am going to store mine in a bag, so this way I can bring it to school to show you. You can look at it and see what mine looks like. So thanks everybody for watching. I can't wait to see what you all create.